Okay, we are here with Dr. Richard Oelberger, clinical psychologist and performance
consultant.
Got it. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited. Basically, we just want to pick your brain about how you got into what it is that you do and the athletes that you now work with, and any advice for athletes or people coming back from injuries specifically.
Yes, very important topic, especially coming back from COVID and all the different ways in which performance has been impacted in the time that we're in right now. But my background is as a clinical psychologist, probably personally. Basketball was always my passion. It's where I found my identity. It was where I went from being probably a quiet, shy individual to getting a nickname, to having a place in the world, to finding confidence, to finding mentors, people who were willing to coach me and teach me things, having some of those big moments of attention, of hitting the winning shot, of feeling like I was important and I had something that I could practice at and I could put my energy to. It's probably also where I discovered some of my team leadership values in terms of and grit, defining who I was, what type of a player I was, which created a lot of meaning for me in my life. And pursuing clinical psychology is this very heady, researchy, academic. It's like kind of detached from the body. And so it took me working in the field of clinical psychology and realizing that it's a noble career and it's important and it helps people. It's more based on diagnosis and deficit, and was really I felt disconnected from my own body. I'd be leaving my practice the other day to go to the karate dojo. I have a black belt in karate, where I've been to the Shaolin Temple in China. And so I felt like, the parts of my life that were meaningful and focused on getting better and improving and building confidence and all these skills and meaning and connection were happening outside of my work life. So, it got me clear that I needed to go back as an adult and expand my learning and continue into the field of sports psychology and allow that part of me, that passion, to come out through going on. So yeah, it's a funny title. They call it certified mental performance consultant. I guess it's a new field for those of you out there who are looking to get into, mental skills training, they call it, or performance consulting. So some people come from the psychology background and some come from more the body-based work. They understand the mechanics of muscle groupings and they understand motivation and coaching, and they want to come more towards, how do I help an athlete? How do I help a team? What's happening in a team environment? Or like we're going to get to, right, in the case of fighters or MMA, a growing field which you're a part of, right? How do you help the individual athlete maintain and bring all of who they are into the ring, and yet learn how to deal with the pressures of being in it on your own? You don't have the support of a team. Your team looks different. You do have a team, but it looks very differently. And when you're in there, learning how to keep certain emotions, anxiety, things like that outside the ring and be completely focused and present. So it's a completely new set of skills, and it's exciting, but it's also so pressure packed where, right, one moment, one instance can cost you a fight and all the energy and time you put in to prepare. So high stakes.
Yeah, that's such an interesting background. And so would you say that you work more with athletes versus normal people, I guess you would say, non-athletes?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the COVID terrain has changed things a little bit, where I was going out and working with a basketball team on set, and then all of a sudden we were doing like we're doing right now, working at virtual. So, my website, Richard Listens, Awaken the Hero Within, is all about getting, whether it's the inner athlete or the inner hero behind everyday performers. So whether it's a physician who's treating a lot of people, or a stay-at-home mom who's managing 2 kids, Zoom class, and still trying to take care of their mental and physical health, right? Anyone who wants to push themselves to the highest level can apply some of these performance and stress management techniques,
Yeah,
because
you're right.
it's right. So I don't focus specifically on athletes. What's fascinating for me is that athletes from sports which I have very little knowledge or background in, including clay pigeon shooting, um, golf, have approached me, because more and more it's become, the stigma, I think, is being reduced, and
Mhm.
more athletes, in the mainstream are talking about how they use therapy or they use mental performance techniques to improve themselves at the high school level. I mean, it's starting out right. Every athlete wants every advantage. So, whether someone wants that just to say that they're doing everything to meet a college coach's criteria, or whether or not they're really internalizing the work. But I've been really moved. For me, I identify with the fighter's mentality. I identify somehow, with just what it takes to get in the ring, and the courage and the level of focus on, technique. It's an art, and yet, like we're talking about, the vulnerability of losing and the costs of losing when you put so much in. So there's an interest level there and an excitement level, and I've been just drawn towards the stories of the individual fighters. So I don't, as much as some could just learn techniques, for me it is about the relationship. I think you have to have a good fit. I know Russell Wilson just talked about, unfortunately, his mental skills coach, Trevor Moawad, passed away from cancer a week or two ago. But he said, Trevor Moawad was his best friend.
Mhm.
He lost the Super Bowl, and Trevor Moawad moved into his kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the fact in which, I know we're going to get into injuries and recovery, that having somebody who's there with you, that you can bring your vulnerability, your lack of confidence, is all of a sudden you've experienced for the first time maybe ever in your career, or ever, right, as a professional, because you hit a challenge, or you didn't see it coming, or you didn't prepare for one thing. Like, we can't always understand how we're going to respond to a
Yeah.
particular circumstance. And so learning skills, techniques, and having somebody who's you trust to allow in, which is hard for athletes who are used to, like, I'm going to control my diet, my plan, my recovery. Like, you're experts in so many realms at owning domains of physicality and focus.
Mhm.
And yet it's hard for us to allow in that we have areas which we need improvement, we need techniques, we need more skills, and we need support.
Yes, you're very right. Myself, I'm an athlete, and I've been competing on the high level. I started sports when I was 15, started competing at the high level in college internationally. And that was in, the early 2000s, no focus on mental training, really none at all. And then, I've been in with the UFC since 2014. And just these last few years, there's a huge emphasis on mental performance. And I do feel comfortable investing emotionally, investing my time. And like you said, it is hard for a lot of fighters specifically. I can only speak for fighters in that, sports category, but it's very hard to open up. We are so in tune with things physically, but not so much mentally and emotionally sometimes. So you work with athletes and normal people, like we said, anywhere from the athlete to the soccer mom, which is amazing, but you tend to really understand the fighter a little bit more. So for fighters
Yeah.
who, like myself,
Usually those soccer moms are CEOs also.
yeah. So for
But
someone
yes,
like myself who, I'm on the highest level of sports, but I'm feeling a little hesitant on reaching out to someone like yourself, a mental performance coach, because of, A, B, and C, what would you say would be something you would want to tell athletes to maybe ease their worries and bring them in to, because it's beneficial on so many levels?
I think I would put my PhD hat on and say, that all of our nervous systems need support. That just because you ask for help, right, just does not mean there's all this stigma that we're taught, that we have to keep our emotions in check, that you're not to let distractions in. All the things that make us strong also make us vulnerable, because we're holding on to too much, right? even as a warrior, even as in battle, if we're always in a defensive position, or right, if we always attack in martial arts, as like I was always like the tiger, always in and straight out, you're going to get vulnerable to somebody who's smaller, quicker, who's willing to use a different style of a leopard, right? Who's willing to be more adaptive. So learning about yourself as an athlete, and learning the connection to how you are as a human being. What are the roots of that, right? Why are you choosing that style? Why are you blocked to adapting? It's a deepening of an understanding of yourself. And when you have that connection to your nervous system and how you can handle change, grow, adapt, you increase your resilience, which means you're less vulnerable. It means you're a better performer because you can compete versus those who are studying your style or who are also talented at the higher and higher levels, right? We want to meet the challenge at the challenge we're being, performing at, to continue to succeed. And also, like, it allows in support. There's an element, like you mentioned, injury, right? This lonely existence, what motivates you, the living in a cage before a fight, all that training also means we're cut off from feeling connected, from the opposite to stress and performance and competing, which is we need the parasympathetic. We need that connection. We need that feeling of somebody's in our corner. They understand us. They support us. They're okay with us, whether or not we win or lose. I think we need to get to that place within ourselves. There's a mindfulness of being okay with who we are, regardless of the result. We need to detach ourselves from the results, right? So I think no matter who you are, it's not so much that there's something missing, but could you benefit from applying techniques to your pre-fight routine, your post-fight routine, ways to notice your arousal levels? Like, are you too amped up? Are there things you could do in between rounds if your opponent did something that triggered you, that was upset, they crossed the line, like somebody said something to you, right? There's so many variables. So the more we can do to have control and control the controllables and bring our energy back into our body so we can stay focused. So I think there's something for everyone. It's not a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at a little bit is a quote you hear a lot in fighting is find calm in the chaos. And, it's a fight at the end of the day, but how do you remain calm and make calculated decisions while someone's trying to take your head off? So.
Right. Like when you're sitting there, I'm sure you've been there, and your oxygen capacity is down and you're reacting, and yet your training shows you like there could be one moment where you reverse it, or the opposite, right? If you resist the move, you may not be able to reverse it. So like being calm enough to keep your training, and to keep your mind clear enough where you're not holding tension or afraid, right? How much of that is like, I'm afraid of what happens if somebody gets the upper hand? Like,
there's a phrase that we use in fighting called not pulling the trigger, and training your butt off and having a game plan, but then when it comes fight night, stepping into the cage and not pulling the trigger basically implies the fact that I think, and you're the doctor, but maybe it's because I'm holding on to some kind of emotion. I'm scared, like you said, or I don't know, anxious or whatever. I want to talk about injuries, but I also want to ask you, besides injury setbacks, what are some of the major issues that you work with athletes, whether it's remaining calm before competition, injury setbacks, stuff like that? Is there other things that you touch on frequently?
Yeah, I think injuries are a huge thing because I think there's a grieving that goes on for a lot of athletes. There can be depression. There can be so many feelings about your identity, how to then, handle that. How do you handle timelines, setbacks? What do you do when you're no longer like, all of a sudden one day you're in the huddle and one day you're not? Like,
who am I? Who am I, basically?
Who am I? And so a lot of the work on my podcast, thank you for the Richard Listens podcast, has been about stories of athletes and their transformation, whether it be when they left sport or whether they found something when they were recovering from an injury,
Yes.
sitting on a bed in Spain,
Mhm.
and they couldn't play basketball, and they couldn't even understand the language of the doctors who were just telling them like
Wow.
confusing things, and they started to write, or right. I have Dr. Russ Carpenter, who's a neuropsychologist at Stanford, was an offensive lineman who got injured and then couldn't even make it across campus. And while he was, making his way across campus, he used to have to take a break midway in the student union and saw a poster about studying abroad, working with fish in Norway. Like, so
Yeah.
he's this is a guy who's like a leading mind who understands like,
Yeah. So basically, great things can come from injuries. I
thank
myself,
you.
on a personal level, I myself am experiencing that in this very moment. I mean, just this very moment, interviewing you. Basically, long story short, been on the bench for 9 months because of spine surgery. You have to figure out, what am I going to do, not only to support myself financially, but to keep my mind from going crazy, because there are so many negative thoughts. Who am I? I'm only a fighter. I don't have talents in other areas, when deep down we know that's not true. So on a personal level, I have forced myself to use my other talents, one being my interview skills. And I can't tell you how much I relate to what you're saying. And unfortunately, I have not taken it into my own hands to work with a mental performance coach, but I do believe in everything that you're saying. I think it's amazing you have a podcast, because I myself have a podcast and was inspired just by listening to another podcast. I was also inspired to become sober by listening to another fighter who got sober on a podcast. So, what is your podcast called again, and how can we find it?
Yeah, it's called Richard Listens.
Mhm.
Everything in my brand. My last name's a little bit hard to, and it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And lately, I've been doing, stories on human transformation, inspiration,
Oh,
people
great.
who kept going despite all the odds, being born with disabilities or being born with, toxic mental health. So whether they were a performer by becoming a stand-up comedian, or whether they're a performer just because they
Oh,
overcame grief, or whether they parlayed that into an athletic career. We have had MMA fighters on the podcast, so there's been a whole focus on athletes, but I wanted to get beyond the layer of just the athlete as identity, because I wanted to give the human being the chance to
yeah.
speak. Because like you said, I think what injury does is it puts a highlight on who am I, and my vulnerability, right? With it, that we think as an athlete, like I'm not allowed to feel vulnerable or fear, it's bad. So we kind of reject it.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a lot of the numbing, the avoiding, the addiction, because I want to get rid of this feeling. We're trained to do it. And usually we did it through our sport. So it takes kind of a reconditioning and acceptance. And by the way, you don't have to work with a performance consultant. If somebody out there is just wanting, they're injured, there's now the Injured Athletes Club on Facebook. Um, Great book by one of my mentors, Carrie Cheadle, is called Rebound. So there are groups out
Resources.
there where if you can get connected to other athletes, maybe just having somebody else who's like, how are you doing on your recovery? How are
Mhm.
you feeling today? Right? Just normalizing this experience like you're talking about,
Yes.
because right, otherwise it feels like you get around other athletes who are in the gym and you're like, right, who am I? Like this identity,
Yeah.
you're really handling this like it is an identity crisis, and it does create this opportunity for what other parts of me do I want to grow.
Yes, yes. And you're so right. When I just had a light bulb moment in speaking to you, because you talked about how we are trained to not be vulnerable, and basically it comes down to athletes, we embody strength, right? And these other things like being vulnerable or any kind of weakness, we tend to run from it, as opposed to kind of, sometimes they say you just got to go through it, you got to feel it, and we're like, no, 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 like I will push that shit down. And sorry, I really, me and my fellow coworkers and other athletes that I know, it's crazy, because we are taught that, yeah, that vulnerability is a weakness, but and I know now in my older years that that's not the case. And then you almost have to do so much backtracking and what do you want to call it? You're like, just fixing of yourself after so many years of drilling that mentality in.
It's like regression therapy. And if you're willing, Ashley, I mean, if maybe you know the answer, maybe for any of your listeners or other fighters out there like you, I would ask, right? Like, go back to that first moment. When's the first time that you learned, whether it be as a fighter or as a woman, that it was not okay to express emotion, right?
I
Like,
remember specifically, I was 15 years old on a wrestling mat, and I got teary-eyed, not out of pain, but out of frustration. I'm a sad crier or an angry crier. I'm just a crier in general. I mean, hormones, probably have a factor in that, but I feel like I got extra hormones going
I
on.
should work on angry crying. I'm probably good at that.
I'm an angry crier. Yeah. And I remember, and it was just like, I'm a female, so I can't call that toxic masculinity. Maybe I can. I was on a boys wrestling team in high school, and then I went to a women's wrestling team. So, around a lot of toxic masculinity, and I picked up on that, and even though just because you're a female doesn't mean you can't have toxic or negative masculine traits about you. Unfortunately, some of us female fighters probably have picked that up along the way, because you have to fit into a certain mold, a certain image in order to be respected. And that's
Right.
unfortunate. The landscape is changing over time. I've been in it for over a decade now, and I'm very happy to see more opportunities and for women. But
So
yeah,
what would you want to tell yourself? What would you want to tell the 15-year-old you if you were sitting in the locker room with her and kept the toxic coaches at bay? What message would you want to have about those feelings as an athlete?
there's so much that I had to do and learn firsthand. Sometimes you just have to go through it and to experience it, to know both sides. And like I said, unfortunately, I'm 34 years old. I've been a professional athlete since I was 23, and I still have so much to learn on the as physical side as well, techniques and skills. But really, I just scratched the surface of my mental and emotional training. So I don't even know what I should have said to her, because I may say something to you right now and you may be like, oh, that's toxic in itself. Like I don't even know really what I would say to her, because I wouldn't want her to embrace her emotions too much, because like I said, I'm a big crybaby and I wear my heart on my sleeve. But I also wouldn't want her to suppress it all at the same time, to try and find some kind of happy balance. But how are you going to tell a 15-year-old girl, balance your emotions, everything's going to be okay? It's very
Right.
hard.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, this kind of an exercise, right? This kind of like messaging to ourselves, where we get to offer that look back and to what may be pushing us to push down or not allow us to feel, let's say, the grief of an injury, right?
Mhm.
Right. So it can be helpful, right? Somehow kind of doing they do call the empty chair technique, or right, talking to the younger version of ourselves, having that kind of conversation. It can be healing internally, because we carry that inner fighter with us, and we
You,
carry the wounds.
you called it the empty chair technique?
Yeah,
Okay, that's
yeah.
that's good. Yeah, yeah, I definitely
But
can see how
a
that
few
would
things I
definitely.
wanted to say to adult Ashley, or any athlete out there who's recovering from a serious injury, and some of this you'll get from Rebound or the Injured Fighters Club, is one that fear of re-injury is completely normal. And having a coach, my sensei used to constantly look at me, and I would wince, because I had a hairline fracture of the ankle, but I don't think it was really that bad. But standing on one leg, or I'd look in the mirror and you see constant gritting of the teeth, and he'd go, is it pain or discomfort? Like in middle of my form, middle of my preparation, pain or discomfort? And I had to take a minute and be like, just discomfort. He'd be like, continue. So having someone who knows that you have this kind of battle going on, that's obviously doesn't want to see you re-injured, but is
Yeah.
helping you move past those triggers of like, is my body ready? Because the mind will always be ready before the body.
Yeah.
So, navigating that patience with that process, that as you get closer to being ready to return to the ring or to your sport, your mind will be telling you I'm ready, but we got to make sure the body is,
Yeah, yeah.
is online with that.
Without giving away too many of your secrets for free, is there any specific techniques like the empty chair that you would share with us for whether it's an athlete coming back from an injury or just an athlete trying to not have performance anxiety? Any little exercise or technique you'd like to share with us?
I think, I mean, there's a variety of skills that you learn in working with a performance consultant, but many athletes may have some basic knowledge of from YouTube and Instagrams. A lot of great information out there right now, or from listening to great podcasts like yours, or
Oh,
listening
not
to
mine. Mine's about
Finding
that.
Mastery with Michael Gervais, or calling Ashley on the phone, I don't know, or watching her fights. Right, that having a performance plan, I think, is important. So and that includes, like we mentioned, pre-performance routines. So you touched on that. So that may be, right, 2 hours before a fight, an hour before a fight, 30 minutes. What do I do? And that can include some sort of breathing exercise, some sort of visualization. So maybe executing your performance plan, and maybe that gets specific enough, you would know better than I do, for this particular fighter, right? In the first round, I want to start off with this. So I mean, seeing yourself go through your plan. So breathing, visualization, and some sort of grounding, because like we talked about, having conscious that your arousal levels are going to peak before a fight. It's
Yeah.
natural to feel fear and excitement. They're very closely related physiologically. But if we don't have a method of, and grounding means anything where you get in touch with the body. So that can be as simple as something they call a body scan, getting in touch and kind of tensing and releasing tension, my shoulders, my arms, starting and progressively moving from the jaw to every part down to your toes, because we want to like accentuate the tension and release it.
Are you
Because we
becoming
know
more in
that
tune with your body at that point? Like, are
you
you
want to
like,
get into it, and the control that you have to release, like in a way, because when anxiety or pressure is increasing, we can either leave the body, which is like dissociation, like you said, the freeze moments, or not performing. What was the term you used?
not pulling the trigger?
Not pulling the trigger, thank you, comes from, or baseball player too, right? They know 3-2, I'm swinging, I know
Yeah.
curveball's
Yeah.
coming, and then you see them freeze, and you're like,
Mhm.
how did that guy,
Yeah.
he looks powerful enough to hit it to the moon, how did he freeze?
Yeah.
Something in the messaging, right? Confusion, doubt, something, right? Misinformation, player thought a fastball was coming. So having the ability to regulate, emotional regulation, through the breath, through visualization, and through grounding, the ability to kind of so you see fighters like jumping up and down in the ring, like bouncing around. It's to kind of energy management, right? As opposed to
Do you feel like,
anxiety, the term. Mhm.
sorry, when you are doing the would you say like contracting of different muscle groups, and you said like it's a little bit are you showing your body that you're in control in a situation where you feel out of control? Because I know on a personal level, I've had to deal with anxiety in my own life, and I do think that it has a lot to do with feeling out of control, unable to control the situation, helpless, weak, vulnerable, and just all at once. And so I'm thinking about that exercise, about just clenching, and I'm like, wow, that could make you feel like you have some sort of control in a moment where you
Yeah,
think you don't have
grounding,
control.
all these strategies give you, like we say, control the controllables, gives you a
Yeah.
chance. Like we said, you're feeling tension, you may not even notice that your body is absorbing. Your body knows what's at stake. You know you're about to go into combat. Like the tensing is natural because you're bracing for conflict.
Mhm.
But like we
Yeah.
mentioned, if you allow just the emotion, if we just were emotional about our fighting or about our sports, then what happens? Somebody uses the emotion against us, right? Or we become so, right? The freezing up is not that somebody didn't want to pull the trigger. It's they're holding so much, they're thinking so much, they stop to perform at the level they want to. They don't execute their plan. So
Yeah.
that's where I say having a pre-performance routine is good. Having a performance routine, what happens if I, right, can I, right, make it to the end of the round, listen to your
Mhm.
coaches,
Yeah.
right?
So you're talking about all these pre-competition exercises that you can do to just capitalize on your performance or your competition that night. Now, you talk specifically about working with MMA fighters, and so I'm sure you understand how other sports have a whole season to do good or do bad versus an MMA fighter. There is so much at stake in one night, in one 5 to 25 minute fight, right? So how, in your opinion, is being a mixed martial artist and MMA fighter different than another athlete on a mental, emotional, psychological level?
Wow. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's so much more vulnerability because of what you said, the stakes on each fight, and
And
the
I hate
physical
it.
pounding and the physicalness of the training and the multiple techniques, the need to execute probably to perfection, that the risk of making an error
Mhm.
feels greater. So,
We literally get paid half the money if we don't win. I don't think that's how it works with football. I don't know. I only know my sport, but I feel like that may be another difference in our sports.
yeah, and that can be a big association with confidence or feeling that I'm good at what I do, and tying it to self-worth. So I mean, it's not what percentage of this is not everyone who can step in the ring as an MMA fighter. You also see the tremendous respect on a lot of occasions between the fighters for the commitment. Well,
Yeah.
this is why doing these kind of work can be rewarding. Like, for your listeners to think is like another thing I got to do or another adding a training. Like, I think the idea is to add in more techniques to help you feel like you go in the ring,
Prepared.
with every tool that you can possibly evaluate. And it gives you a skill set to evaluate your process. Like, I know we want to go to results, and it's really hard when your livelihood is tied to something. But, even for those outside of sport, I've been tempted to, do a lot of things and see a lot of patients and do something that made a lot of money. And it wasn't necessarily the process that I wanted to be involved in to grow.
Mhm.
So, like we are talking about, even shifting our idea between wins and losses, like sometimes a loss, if you're not afraid to go up against the best, you may learn a lot from your opponent, like how we view the loss, right? What did they teach you about yourself? Even if we just look at wins or losses, sometimes people win a lot, but they're not really challenging themselves, or they're only taking on those who, like work with their skill set. So
Yeah.
are you willing to risk? Are you willing to face your fear of losing?
Yeah. 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 There, I
Do you
mean,
want to build confidence, or are you willing to stay safe because your ego gets boosted from being, strongest, toughest, and winning in a particular way? So, like, redefining what it means to win, for Russell Wilson, right? Losing the Super Bowl and then coming back the next year makes it that much more meaningful
yeah.
because he learned something about himself, about being a leader, about, how to be so close and so upset, you know, and
Yeah.
still to go after it, right? So there are a lot of people though that once they lose, and many name fighters that once they lose two and forget it's second, because now there's like been a block of time of a year and a half or 2 years where in your head you could be like, we lose confidence. Can I still do this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a whole, we call it in fighting or boxing ring rust, cage rust, because you haven't been in there for a long time. That's a whole new psychological battle, right? Did I forget what it's like to be in there? Am I going to be prepared because I've had such a long layoff? I'm sure other athletes have long layoffs and they have to, you know, I don't know what you would call it in their sport. We call it ring rust. But yeah, so you have a podcast, like you said, it's Richard Listens. I was wondering who would be your ideal guest?
Oh, thank you. Well, I focused on stories of transformation. I
Mhm.
focus on anyone who's overcome major adversity to go after, their passion in life or to make a difference in the life of others. I love talking to athletes, but I don't want athletes to feel like it has to be a competition about performance. If you were an athlete and you learned that your passion was elsewhere, then I want to share your story. I would like you mentioned, the gift of the medium of podcasting and being virtual is that we can reach each other across the country, that we can help those who are in a hospital bed right now. I've spoken to producers on major television shows here in LA that had a heart transplant, and the only thing they could do was listening to podcasts every day. Or like you mentioned, an athlete recovering from an injury.
Yeah.
This has been the medium of connecting, of reaching out. So this is a powerful resource that we're engaging in, right? And being able to remove the isolation, if that's the right, the punishment of being this fighter or this athlete or this performer who's so focused, is that we then lose connection. That's something that I hope that we can use podcasting to have discussions, to share knowledge, and let other people know that they're not alone, that they are, support is a call away. And whether it be a performance technique or more emotional, there's a lot of athletes like that they've been battling demons, pain, addiction, and the athlete covers up, like, as long as I'm doing okay in my sport or in my profession, I don't have to face what's underneath. So I want to let people know, you're all my heroes if you're willing to come out, if you're willing to receive help, if you're willing to give help.
Yeah.
We all have such power in changing the landscape of the world right now, and the world needs healing.
Yes, I fully agree. Like I said earlier, that is one of the reasons I started my podcast, because I myself was listening to another podcast. There's, another fighter's story resonated with me. I thought to myself, what if my story could help other people? Or what if me giving other athletes or individuals a spotlight or a platform could then help someone else? And I think that's exactly what you're doing as well. Maybe your story, maybe the story that you're sharing is then going to resonate with someone else and create this awesome ripple effect of good deeds, of healing. And that's amazing. And what I want to talk about before we go is, I myself, I'll tell you right now, I've thought about hiring or working with a mental performance coach, and I just didn't know where to start. Yes, there's lots of resources, but sometimes when you have too many options, that's why, not for me, but I don't eat meat, but like In-N-Out Burger is so great, because you go and you're like, I'm gonna get one of these three things, So sometimes, like, how do I get the In-N-Out Burger of mental coaching, because I don't know who to pick, who's right for me. Does it have to be in person? Can it be Zoom? What would you recommend to either an athlete or just someone who needs to work on their mental performance?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, it is highly individual. Sometimes you will meet someone who works with your sport
Mm-hmm.
and has that, if you want content specific knowledge,
Yeah.
and I support that, like, that if somebody you've seen help other baseball players and you're a baseball player, you may feel comfortable there. But I went through the certification, the official channels of the American Association of Sports Psychology, which is aasp.org, right? Because they will show on there who's been credentialed.
Oh,
You can see what sports they work in.
oh wow.
There's links to their sites, and it gives you information about their fees. So you get a sense that they're a professional. There is, it's a combination. If you want them at your meet or at your fight, and that will help you, it does, that may be something that's worked in, right? For me, a lot of the work is pre-game or post-game or pre-fight and
Yeah.
post-fight, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of debriefing post-fight when you're feeling physically beat up, whether or not you won or lost. It's
Mm.
also a very difficult time during recovery
Oh yeah.
and leading up, right? Leading up to a fight or a competition. So Zoom is fine because there's a lot of homework done weekly, right? How are you going to take this, with the work we're doing right now, and take it into your practice this week? So
Mm-hmm.
when we speak, right, you get to feel like, oh, and nobody else is really seeing it. That's why there's stigma around this, right? Nobody knows what you were doing in the corner of the mat for an extra 5 minutes if you're doing it internally. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
some of it involves writing out your plan and looking at your book and seeing how you did, or tracking, right? We all need to know how well we completed or stayed to what we said we were going to do. Oh, today I only did, visualization, and I didn't take a break. I didn't reduce my anxiety. I just went back in the ring and I noticed I felt out of balance, right? So it's constant learning and evaluation going on. So either go with athletes that you feel have worked with someone in your field that has helped them. And it's important to define, like we're talking about, is it that you're needing more help with the psychological aspects and the emotions of healing and recovering from something, or are you wanting to work specifically on performance skills. How do I get, more focused when I'm in the waiting room before I get in the pool or before I get in the ring? Like you said, how do I avoid going into freeze or what's the term again? Holding the punch?
Yeah, not pulling the trigger.
Not pulling the trigger. Yeah. So, right. I love it. So, right. I mean, it's very clear, right? So I have a performance issue, and that's a lot of times what's going on, that I want help like that. So it can be Zoom, it can be face to face. It doesn't have to be like therapy where week to week you're just licensed for life and sentenced, right? It
Yeah.
can be, right, I see this person during season or in the off season, we do some work.
Yeah.
And then and then I like to see, especially young athletes putting pressure on themselves, take a break, right? In the summer, like, how much fun are you having? Just someone like yourself, I'm working with you. I want to know, right, how much. I want to hear about your podcast. I want to make sure that we're doing things that develop the other parts of you.
Yeah.
Because it's like that trust, like the muscle. I know I can pick up my gloves and fight whenever I need to, or bare hands in your case, right? Right. But I also want to know that, like we're talking about progressive muscle relaxation, I have the ability to let it go, that I can enjoy my life, because that's going to be with you. These are techniques, whether you're fighting or not, whether you're winning or not. We need to know that you're bringing who you are along the way. So that's part of the work that I bring in this session.
I can definitely understand that, as far as I feel like it might be important for your coach or doctor, whoever you're working with, to get a good base, not just of how you are when you're going through an injury, but your base of when you're not going through an injury, so that they can better gauge how maybe, how down and out you are, because if they don't know what normal Ashley is like, then how are they going to gauge, oh man, she's really upset, or maybe that's how she is all the time, who knows? So I totally understand that. I think like anything, consistency is key. And I think it's all about maintaining a healthy relationship with whoever you work with, because it's a very personal thing. And I think I've used that as an excuse, but no more. I am interested, and I'm really excited to look at those resources. That book, what was it called again?
Rebound. Rebound is the one for that I can show you for injuries.
Oh, wow, there it is.
Yes, this is Carrie Cheadle. A good one on trauma in the body is called When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. And a good one on mindfulness techniques for athletes is called The Mindful Athlete. I can send these all over to you to put in the show notes.
And how could I find your podcast, and how can I follow you on social media?
Thank you. Instagram, everything is under Richard Listens. The website, richardlistens.com, has some past podcasts, links to the podcast. You can also go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Richard Listens, one word. To keep a lookout for the Zero Method book coming out in early 2021. So some of these techniques, whether you be an athlete or emergency room physician, some techniques for regulating, getting the support you need, and managing your stress and staying connected to what you're passionate about, that I want to make sure everybody hears and stays connected to.
Well, thank you, Dr. Richard. It's been an awesome interview. I hope we can continue to speak in the future. New studies are always coming out. New athletes are always getting hurt. There's always something to talk about. So
no, I'm excited. I want to be ringside. I want to be in the arena, and it's an honor to support those willing to both push themselves physically as an athlete and also emotionally see how they can evolve and help others in the world. So thank you for having this platform and inviting me.
Thank you. Ashley Evans Smith signing off for Njitsu.com. Bye, guys.
Bye.